somewhere around 50, 60, 70. A strange thing happens to a person. The urgency of youth is gone. The children are grown or gone or somewhere in between. The career either peaked or plateaued or ended the way careers end, quietly, without a ceremony. And in that new quiet, a question starts knocking that was always there, just drowned out before. Did I spend my one life on the right things? Most people never say this out loud. Not to their spouse, not to their children, certainly not to themselves in the mirror. They bury it under routine, the coffee, the errands, the television at night, but it doesn't leave, it just waits. I want to tell you about a man who finally answered that question. I'll call him Walter because his story isn't really his alone. It belongs to almost everyone who's ever chased the wrong thing believing it was the right one. You might see your father in him, your husband, maybe yourself. Walter was 68 years old when the question finally caught up to him. And it didn't happen the way you'd expect, not at a funeral, not in a hospital bed. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Sitting in a folding chair in a garage he no longer needed, holding a box of trophies from a job that no longer existed. That's where we start. If you've ever sat in a version of that garage, literal or otherwise, I need you to keep watching. Because Walter's next 40 minutes changed the last 20 years of his life. And they can change yours too. Walter didn't have a dramatic life. That's important to understand because most lives aren't dramatic, they're just long. And long is its own kind of heavy. He grew up the son of a man who worked 41 years at the same plant and never once complained about it. Not because he loved it, but because complaining wasn't something men in his generation did. Walter absorbed a single lesson from watching his father without anyone ever saying it out loud. Your worth is what you provide. So that's the life Walter built. He worked hard, genuinely hard, the kind of hard that deserves respect. He climbed from the loading dock to a management title. He never missed a mortgage payment. He coached his son's baseball team for 6 seasons, even when he was exhausted. He gave his family a 2-story house in a good school district, 2 paid-off cars, and a savings account that made him feel every single month like he had done his job. And by every external measure, Walter succeeded. But here's the part nobody warns you about. You can succeed completely at the goal you set and still discover, decades later, that it was the wrong goal. Walter spent 40 years answering a question nobody actually asked him. He assumed the question was, how do I provide enough? And he answered it brilliantly. But the real question, the one underneath, was never asked. Not by his father, not by his culture, not even by himself until that Tuesday in the garage. The real question was, who am I? Apart from what I provide. And at 68, holding a box of company trophies for a job he'd retired from 3 years earlier, Walter realized he didn't have an answer. He had built an entire identity out of usefulness. And usefulness, it turns out, has an expiration date that provision alone can't survive. This is the part people skip past too quickly. So let's slow down. Every choice Walter made had a cost. Not a bad cost. Most of them were the right choices, given what he knew. But costs, all the same, the overtime shifts meant he missed his daughter's first steps. He heard about them at dinner, second-hand, from his wife's tired retelling. He told himself there'll be more moments, and there were, but he was present for fewer of them than he remembers, because presence and attendance aren't the same thing. He was in the room. He wasn't always in the moment. The promotion he chased for 6 years meant relocating the family away from his own aging parents. He told himself, I'll visit more. He visited twice a year for a few days, always half checked out, always thinking about the emails piling up back home. His father died while Walter was in a hotel conference room 3 states away, and the last real conversation they'd had, 3 weeks earlier, had been about scheduling, not about anything that mattered. None of this makes Walter a bad man. I want to be very clear about that, because it's easy to hear a story like this and think, well, he made his choices. He did. And most of them were reasonable. That's what makes this so quietly devastating. You don't have to make terrible choices to end up somewhere you didn't intend to go. You just have to make 1,000 reasonable ones in the wrong direction without ever stopping to check the compass. Here's the sentence Walter told me, sitting in that garage, that I've never forgotten. I kept saying later to the people I loved and now to the job. And later never came due the way I expected. It came due all at once, in an empty garage, when there was no one left asking me for now anymore. Sit with that for a second. Not to punish yourself, to notice. Because here's the thing, if you're 50, 60, 70 years old right now, and something in that last sentence landed in your chest, you still have time to change what happens next. Walter didn't know that yet, but he was about to find out. Grief has a strange sense of timing. It rarely arrives when you're prepared for it, and it almost never arrives about the thing you think it's about. Walter's granddaughter, Emily, was staying with him that week. 12 years old, endlessly curious, the way children are before the world teaches them to perform certainty instead of ask questions. She found him in the garage, sitting with that box of trophies, and she asked the question only a child would dare to ask directly. Grandpa, are these your favorite memories? Walter looked down at them. 22 years of employee of the quarter plaques. A retirement clock that had never once kept correct time. And he opened his mouth to say, yes, because that was the automatic answer, the answer that protected 40 years of choices from being questioned. But he didn't say yes. He sat there in silence for almost a full minute, while a 12-year-old waited patiently beside him. And in that silence, something in him finally admitted what he'd been avoiding for 2 decades. These weren't his favorite memories. They weren't even memories. They were evidence that he had been useful. And somewhere along the way, he had confused being useful with being alive. He started crying, not the composed, private kind of crying men his generation are too trained to do in the shower where no one can hear. Real crying. In front of his granddaughter. 22 years of unexamined choices finally arriving at their bill. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix it. She just sat next to him and put her small hand on his arm and said the thing that broke him open completely. It's okay, Grandpa. You can start having favorite memories now. I need you to hear that line again, because it's not just something a child said to her grandfather. It's true. For you too. Whatever age you're reading this at, you can start having favorite memories now. Let's slow down and name the actual mistake, because if we don't name it precisely, you can't avoid it. Walter's mistake wasn't working hard. Hard work is not the villain of this story. His mistake was believing that provision and presence were the same currency. That if he gave his family enough money, enough security, enough stability, it would automatically translate into enough love, enough connection, enough of himself. It doesn't work that way. They're different currencies entirely. You cannot pay a presence debt with a provision surplus. The math simply doesn't transfer, no matter how badly we want it to. The second mistake, and this one is even more common, is what psychologists sometimes call deferred living. The belief that real life, real connection, real meaning is always one milestone away. After this project, after the mortgage is paid off, after the kids are through college, after retirement, Walter deferred and deferred and deferred. And one day he looked up and discovered that later is not a place you eventually arrive at. It's a habit, and habits left unexamined run your whole life without your permission. Here's what I want you to really understand. This isn't a story about a man who failed. Walter didn't fail. Walter succeeded at the wrong metric for 40 years, which is a completely different and far more common problem than failure. Failure teaches you something is broken. Success at the wrong metric convinces you everything is fine, right up until the box of trophies in the empty garage tells you otherwise. If any part of your life right now is running on a metric you never actually chose, inherited from your father, your culture, your first boss, this is your moment to check the compass before the garage moment finds you too. Walter didn't fix his life in one dramatic gesture. There was no single grand apology, no movie-style redemption scene. Real repair almost never looks like that. It looks like 40 ordinary days, each one slightly different than the day before. He started small, almost embarrassingly small. He called his daughter, the one whose first steps he'd missed decades earlier. And instead of asking about her job or her schedule, he asked, "What was it like growing up with me?" And then this is the part that took the most courage. He actually listened to the answer without defending himself. It was hard to hear, some of it genuinely hard. But he sat in it the way Emily had sat beside him in the garage, and he let it be true instead of explaining it away. He started writing to his grandchildren. Not lectures, not life advice. Just small, honest letters about who he actually was underneath the provider, his fears, his regrets, the things he'd never said out loud to anyone. He wanted them to know him, not just remember him. He kept the box of trophies, but he moved it to a closet. And in its place, on the shelf where it used to sit, he put a single photograph, Emily's small hand on his arm, taken by his wife on her phone that day in the garage, the day he finally cried in front of someone who mattered, that became his new favorite memory. Not an achievement, a moment. This is the part I most want you to take with you today. Repair doesn't require you to undo the past. It only requires you to change what you do with the time that's left. And there is always more time left than the 2 a.m. voice wants you to believe. I didn't tell you Walter's story so you could feel something about Walter. I told you so you could ask yourself the question he waited 68 years to ask: what metric have I been running my life by? And did I actually choose it, or did I inherit it? Maybe, like Walter, you inherited the belief that your worth equals your usefulness. Maybe you inherited a different one, that your worth equals your achievements or your appearance, or how well you kept everyone else comfortable while quietly setting yourself last. Whatever it is, it was probably given to you before you were old enough to evaluate it. And it's never too late to hand it back. Here is what I want you to actually do. Not just hear "do" in the next 24 hours. Pick one person you've been saying later to, a phone call you've been postponing, a conversation you've been avoiding because it might get uncomfortable, an apology you've been too proud to make or too afraid to ask for. Do it this week. Not someday. This week. Because here's the truth Walter learned in that garage, and the truth I need you to walk away with today. The box of trophies will always be there. It's not going anywhere. But the people who are waiting for you to say now instead of later, they are not guaranteed to wait forever. You still have time to have favorite memories. Real ones. Starting today if you choose it. If this reached something in you today, if some part of this reminded you of your own garage, your own box of trophies, your own version of later, I want you to know that noticing it is not too late. Noticing it is the whole beginning. Take a breath. Think of one name. And this week say now instead of later. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe someone who's still deferring their own life, waiting for a someday that keeps moving further away. And if you'd like more stories like Walter's, stay with us. There's more waiting for you here.